Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is, where you are in any part of the world. Welcome to the School of Wisdom, the July 2022 edition. My name is Peter Olayola. Now, for those that are new to the School of Wisdom is designed to see how we can learn to turn the simplicity of the Word of God into the practicalities of everyday life. In other words, how does the principles, the keys, the tenets, the important lessons in the Bible relate to the issues that we are faced with in everyday life, the 21st century? How do you go beyond religious ideas, religious dogma, to practicalities, if you may turn it, if you may say it that way? And so we talk about how you can move beyond theories, how you can move beyond stories, how you can move beyond what happened to Abraham many centuries ago, to how that can relate to you as you live your life as a child of God in the 21st century, whether you live in the Western world or regardless of where you live in any part of the world. So it's about upholding Christian values, Christian ethics, if you like, or again, to put it even simpler, or to put it more simply, in relation to First Timothy 4:8, is about how godliness can be profitable to you, as the scripture says that godliness is profitable unto all things, having the promise of the life that now is and of that which is to come. Now, let's say a short word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this session. Thank you for this month. Thank you for your help that we have always enjoyed. And Lord, we commit what we'll be doing this month into your hands, that you help us, and that everything will be to the glory and praise of your holy name, in the name of Jesus. Thank you, dear Lord. In Jesus' mighty name, we have prayed. Amen. Now, you're welcome again to July 2022. And like I mentioned last time out, we are continuing our discussion on overcoming failures or repeated disappointment. Overcoming failure or repeated disappointment. How do you overcome failure? How do you overcome repeated disappointment? I did mention the fact that I'm using these terms loosely, that we have desires at different points in time in our life. We have desires, we have expectations, we have goals, we have targets. So when we reach out to achieve these goals, or when we set out to achieve these desires and we fall short of expectations, it can be in any area of life. That's why the terms are just used like that. Repeated disappointment, that okay, you set out to achieve something and you fail to reach that target, that goal, that equals, or at least that brings disappointment, right? So in this context, that is what you can call failure or repeated disappointment. So it can be, for example, somebody that wants to lose weight. So you set out to do that, but you find yourself, you keep falling short. Or you try to write an exam, maybe a qualifying exam, you keep falling short of maybe the expected results. You want to get a job and you find yourself unable to get the desired job, right? Or you have certain goals, certain milestones that you hope to achieve. Even want to get married, but you cannot seem to be able to achieve that goal, that target. So when you fall short of the expected outcomes or of the expected desire, in broad sense, we say that is failure. And we started by saying we look at the fundamental fact. Among other things, we say that failure is basic, right? It's normal, it happens in life to different people at different points in time, that when they set out to achieve something, somehow they fall short, or they can fall short of intended target or intended outcome. That's not the most important thing. That our attitude towards failure, towards these setbacks, matter more than the fact that these setbacks actually happen. And we also went ahead to and we started talking about the golden rules of turning failures around. That the first thing is that we should not blame people, that we should not blame God, you should not blame the devil, you should not blame the system, right? That maybe you lost your job because of a downturn in the economy, and someone say, if I don't blame the system, so if the downturn did not happen, I wouldn't have lost my job. Yeah, that is true. But what we are saying is that blaming conveys a negative energy, right? So the time that you are using to blame, you can use that instead to accept responsibility and see how you can turn the situation around. And it's the and also we said, don't blame others, don't blame family members, don't blame relatives, even if it's apparent that the fault is not directly yours. So I said, if people have taken advantage of you in the past before, don't blame them for taking advantage of you. Blame yourself. that is, accept responsibility. So understand the context. Accept responsibility for not being wiser, for not knowing better. And again, we are only talking about this in relation to repeated disappointment or repeated frustrations, that we should not look to externalize the problem. We should look at ourselves. We should look inwardly, right? So that is very fundamental. We are only talking about not blaming in the context of repeated failures, repeated disappointment. And why am I making this clarification? Because somebody might just say, oh, so that means if somebody has been raped, does it mean it's their fault? No, that's not what we're talking. We're just talking about this in relation to repeated disappointment. That a person set out to achieve certain targets, certain goals, but they somehow they keep falling short. They keep failing to reach that target. So in such circumstances, in such instances, instead of trying to blame external factors, we are saying you should look inward. So that is the first point. And we say now looking inwards at the same time is not the same thing as internalizing failure. In that we should not internalize failure. That a person failed does not make them a failure, right? That something is wrong in your approach does not mean something is wrong with you as a person. So it is important that we understand what we are talking about. So this idea of blaming it can be understood as failing to accept responsibility for one's choices and actions in the context of repeated disappointment or perpetual failures. Now, and I want to continue from this idea of not internalizing failure, right? Not expecting failure. So, what do we mean by that? Don't think the problem is with you as a person, right? You are not blaming other people, right? You are saying that yes, you want to accept responsibility, but at the same time it doesn't mean that the problem is with you as a person, because that can lead to what we call inferiority complex, this feeling of inadequacy, that when failures happen repeatedly, people tend to internalize it to the extent that they think, oh, maybe I'm actually born not to be successful, or I'm just not good enough, or no matter how much I try, I will always be frustrated. Huh? So it can affect a person's image of themselves, and that can lead to things like jealousy, like envy, and all of those things, right? So we should not internalize failure. And I want to start that by talking about a story told as told by the man Norman Vincent Peale many years ago. The man has gone to heaven now, and he shared this story about a tattoo, a man that was doing tattoo for people, right? So Norman Vincent Peale said there was a time he went to one of the Asian countries, and he entered a tattoo shop, right, where people do tattoo. They have tattoo on their bodies, and so he saw different designs, different things that people inscribe on their body, and he was fascinated by one he saw in particular, and what the inscription simply says, "Born to lose." Born to lose. So he was perplexed that, do you mean people actually ask you to inscribe "born to lose" on their body, maybe on their arm, on their chest, on their back, or whatever? That do you? Why would somebody ask you to inscribe this, that they are born to lose? That he found it so fascinating, and the tattoo man simply replied and told him, that Dr. Peel, that see, before people inscribe this on their body, they have already inscribed it on their mind, right? Before people will come to him to say, oh, they were born to lose, that he should inscribe "born to lose" on their body, according to him, according to the man, that they have actually inscribed it on their minds, right? That the mind has already accepted the fact that they were born to lose. So they just wanted to act it out, or they just wanted to take steps in that direction. So that leads me to the third point I want to talk about, which is don't visualize failure, don't expect failure, right? Now, have you had maybe instances where people failed before, and they say, oh, they were not surprised to fail, or they were actually expecting it, right? So people say sometimes that it wasn't surprising to them, they were expecting it. Now, that is something that people somehow are programmed subconsciously, maybe as a result of repeated failure. That's why I say it's an extension of not internalizing failure. And people even have some of these ideas that, oh, if you don't expect too much, you will not be disappointed, right? If you set your expectation just at a reasonable level. So if you don't accept, if you don't hit the target, you will not be disappointed. But no, we are not even talking about whether you are setting your expectation too high or not. But we are just talking about something that you reach out to achieve, something that you want to achieve for your own good, something that you desire, right? So it's not so much about setting the bar too high or too low. That's not the point. The point is you want to achieve something that you sincerely desire. It can be in any area of life. Remember where we started from. So but because of repeated failure, repeated disappointment, you can be programmed. That can affect your subconscious mind, that even when you are praying for something, you are expecting a negative outcome. So in the Bible, for example, Acts chapter number 12, Peter was put in prison, right? And the Bible said the church, they were making prayers for him. They were praying for him. But when Peter was released, a young girl went out, said, "Hey, Peter is at the door." They say, "You are beside yourself. Peter is in prison." So, in other words, as they were praying, even though they were praying, even though they were doing all sorts of things, in their mind, Peter was still in prison. They could not envision Peter being out, yet they were praying. Right? So what we're saying is we should not expect failure when you actually approach a particular thing, or when you set out to achieve a particular goal, a particular target, a particular desire, you set out to pursue it. Don't expect failure. And this is not just something that you just say, "Oh, I don't expect failure." No, it's something that has to do with our programming, our mindset, our mentality. Right? So don't say, "Oh, I just wanted to try it out." No, we should not be programmed to expect failure. And this programming is something that operates, like I said, with our mindset, with our mentality. And mentality is something that I hope that we'll be able to talk about from next month. So we should not visualize failure. We should not expect failure. Why is that important? Why is not expecting failure important? Proverbs 23:18 says, "Surely there is an end, and your expectation shall not be cut off." That is, your expectation will come to pass. So that means if you are expecting failure, if you are expecting things to go wrong, almost always they will go wrong. Things will almost always go according to your expectation. And of course, this is not the same thing as having balloon dreams, balloon ideas, right? Fantasy, if you like to put it that way. Like I said to someone recently, that sometimes maybe some people might contact me to say, "Oh, you know what, I want you to write reference for me with regards to a job or an application to a university and all that." And within myself, I know they will not be taken. I know they will not succeed. Why? Not because I was expecting failure for such individuals, but because I know these individuals have not understood the dynamics or the requirements of what they are aiming for. So it's a different thing that, for example, let's say you are looking for a job and then you know you are not qualified yourself. You know you are not qualified. Maybe they say you should have 5 years of experience and you have not got any experience, and you are hoping and wishing that they will take you. That's not what we are talking about. In almost all cases, right, except by the supernatural act of the Almighty, if they say you should not apply if you haven't got any certain kind of experience, if you apply, most likely you will fail. So that's not what we are talking about. If you apply, most likely you will fail. Like I heard the story of somebody that they said, "Oh, this job require you to have driving license, that driving experience, that you must be able to drive." And the persons, whether they thought they were in faith or something, apply without actually knowing how to drive. And so they got a job, and of course they were happy and all of those things. But afterwards, when it came for the time to actually start doing the job, they needed to drive and they couldn't drive, and they lost the job because of that. So that is not what we are talking about when we say we should not expect failure. That a person actually knows what is required, right? And but somehow they are, because of the way they have been programmed, even when they are qualified, even when they are able to meet the requirement, right, they somehow within themselves expect things to go wrong. It's just like maybe somebody, you are looking for somebody to marry, but somehow because of maybe negative experiences in the past, because of maybe previous failures in relationship and all that, so when they even are in a relationship, they are programmed to think in terms of what can go wrong. They are programmed to think in terms of what is likely to go wrong in their relationship. So because of the way their subconscious operate, they either do things wrongly, or they make by virtue of the way they are thinking, they take steps that eventually make things to go wrong, right? So but if we must turn failure around, even if we have failed severally, we should not visualize failure. We should not expect things to go wrong, right? We should not be conditioned to think in terms of what is likely to go wrong. And that is a very tough task for the human mind, because on the average, people are wired to think in terms of things going wrong, right? That's why when you tell people, for example, about a big idea or a massive project, one of the natural reactions is to think, what if this happen? What if it doesn't go right? Or what if certain things actually go contrary to your expectations? So we are almost always wired to think in terms of negative experiences, and this affects how we relate to different issues that we are confronted with, or different desires that we have at different points in time. So we should not blame people. We should not internalize failure. And number three, I say we should not visualize failure. We should not expect failure, because if our expectation is even contrary to what we are praying for, what we are acting towards, it is that expectation that will eventually come to pass. Right? Now, number four is don't dwell on failure. Don't dwell on failure. Now, that means don't dwell on the fact that you have failed before. Don't let that affect your ability to concentrate or to focus in the present. Now, why is this important? Because dwelling on what has gone wrong will prevent you from seeing what can go right. Dwelling on what has gone wrong will prevent you from seeing what can go right, what you can still change. Dwelling on what you have lost in the past, for example, will prevent you from seeing what you have left, what you can adjust, what you can make right, right? So, in other words, don't build a monument around your failure. Don't build a monument around your past disappointment, right? So, what that means is, for example, if let's say you another way of saying it before I explain it is that don't live in regrets. Don't spend all your days regretting what you have missed or what has gone wrong, or your past investment that did not yield the desired result. So, for example, somebody's marriage has failed, right? So somebody, maybe their partner, their wife, their husband's divorced, they are divorced, they are separated from them. Now, 5 years, 10 years down the line, you're still talking about, oh, the fact that, oh, when you were still married, when, no, for how long are you going to talk about that? Yeah. So you set out, maybe you had investment and you put all your resources to start a business, and the business crashed, the business collapsed. Don't keep dwelling on it, that, oh, if not that the money that I put down, if not that it failed, I wouldn't be in this place. No, what has happened has happened. The point is, what can you do now? What can you make happen out of what you have left, right? Maybe it's a missed opportunity. Maybe you had opportunity to travel to a particular country, or to be the business partner of somebody, or to be in a relationship with somebody, and it did not work out. This time around, let's say yes, it was your mistake and all of those things. You don't need to keep dwelling on it. You don't need to keep regretting these missed opportunities. You don't need to keep dwelling or swimming in this ocean of self-pity, right? Because the more you do that, the more you disqualify yourself from seeing what is still possible, or what you can still make happen, right? So you don't dwell on the fact that things went wrong for you in the past, right? You don't capitalize on the fact that, oh, you set out to achieve certain standards, and because they did not work out, as much as possible, you just pitch your tent there. No, we don't do that. So we can analyze failures, we can analyze disappointment without dwelling on them, right? The fact that something went wrong in the past does not mean you cannot just sit down in the present, learn from it, without actually letting it affect your approach as you set out to start again, right? So imagine, for example, somebody lost their car, right? Maybe the car got stolen, the car was involved in an accident. Yeah, they were still talking about the car 1 year after. No, I mean, so many things would have happened after then. Why would you be talking about a lost car 1 year after? Well, except, of course, you want to say, oh, maybe you have moved on, things are significantly better for you, and all of those things. So we don't dwell on failure, right? We don't live in regrets. Don't regret failures. Don't keep saying, oh, it was my fault, and because of that, yeah, I will not be able to do anything. So you dwell so much, and you gather so much negative energy, that it hinders you from being able to press on, from being able to do something else with your life, right? So don't blame people, don't blame the system, don't blame God, don't blame situations and circumstances. Just accept responsibility. Don't internalize failure. Don't visualize failure. Now, don't dwell on past failures in particular. And the next one I want to talk about is don't be rigid about failures or disappointments. Now, this is very important. Don't be rigid about failures or disappointment. Now, what do I mean by this? Now, let me give this example. In those days, I remember some instances where people would say, for example, maybe when they were leaving high school, they would say, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a doctor. I want to be an accountant. So I want to study medicine. I want to study law. I want to study accounting. Right? So people will write the qualifying exams, and maybe if for whatever reason they fail to meet up the targets to start studying medicine, so they might have opportunity to study something that is not medicine but that is related to medicine. Now, in almost all cases, you will see people say, hey, you know what, it's either medicine or nothing. So they waste the first year, they waste the second year, the third year, fourth year. In some instances, people have stayed much longer than 7 years just because they wanted a particular thing, right? A particular desire, right? Now, but that is not a very wise thing to do, because these same people, even for whatever reason, could have said, you know what, if I cannot get medicine, I will enroll into a university and I'll keep making attempts and see what happens. That's one way to go about it. Another way to go about it is if they are actually able to give their best to that particular course that they've been given, they can graduate with a very high grade and then re-enroll and then skip the first year and start the medicine they wanted to study as an adult student or whatever, depending on the country where they are. In other words, we should not be rigid in our approach. That's what we are saying. Now, the fact that you set out to achieve something and you failed, right, does not mean, and of course we have said that, as much as possible, you can learn from failure or without actually internalizing it and all of those things. Now, what we are saying is the fact that you have failed does not mean you are just aloof. That means you don't think carefully about what you missed, what went wrong. So you have not really analyzed it. You have not really learned what you need to change, particularly about your approach. So you just think, you know what, I'll just keep doing it. And somebody has said before, they are doing the same thing over and again and expecting a different result. It's a proof of insanity, right? So it's not that you are just rigid, that this is the only thing I want to do. No, you are flexible in your approach, right? While still keeping the end goal, the vision, the desire in mind. You are flexible. Right? So you are not saying it is only this way. As long as you get to your target end, to your desired end, the approach might be slightly different. You may need to tweak the approach a bit, right? So that does not mean that you are failing. What you just need to know is to understand the situation and what you need to adjust. So, for example, somebody said when she wanted to learn how to drive, she did the test, that's learning how to drive in the UK now. So she did the practical exam. The first time she failed. Trying to do a manual test. So the first time she failed. The second time she failed. The third time she failed. The fourth time she failed. The fifth time she failed. And then somebody advised her, or people around her advised her that, oh, why don't you try to learn how to drive in automatic and see whether that will be much straightforward for you. So she just took it on board. Now she did the test again, this time around in an automatic car, and then she passed, right? So the sixth time she passed. Now, from that experience, what you can see is this: the goal is to know how to drive, to pass the driving test, right? Now, there is nothing that says, oh, you need to actually pass in this particular way before, or you need to actually pass in a manual car before they know you are a qualified driver. In that instance, she needed to pass as soon as possible, and because her aim or our vision was not being aided by a manual car, she just converted to an automatic car and then she learned. Now, I also know of somebody that after they now got an automatic license, they now say, oh, you know what, now let me just learn for the fun of it and now go and learn how to drive in a manual car. So imagine if this person had been rigid to say, oh, this is the only thing, I must actually know how to drive this first. No. So you can actually pursue the same goal, the same target, the same vision, the same end product, but in a different way or in a different dimension, right? So this not being rigid about disappointment or failure is the reason why, for example, maybe somebody will be in a relationship, they say, oh, I want maybe the person I will marry to be like this, to be like that, to have these qualities, everything 100%. No, because you yourself, you are not 100%. Now, this again does not mean you are settling for less than your desire. It just means that you can adapt to this changing situation or changing circumstances or even the realities around you. It is as simple as that. That don't be rigid about failure. Don't say it is only a or no. No. Because if your destination is there, you can find out that most times in life the answer is not either or. No, most times in life the answer is not either or. You find that there are so many in betweens, there are so many ways to still go about between A and B that you probably may not know of until you're actually willing and ready to tweak things a bit. So don't be rigid about failures, particularly if it keeps occurring. Check yourself. What do you need to change? So you are looking for a job in a particular company, and it seems each time you apply, you get rejected. So they say, oh, you don't have the required experience, and you keep applying. No, the experience will not fall on you. Can you diversify? Can you see maybe a related sector where you can pick one or two things and then bring it on board? Maybe that will help you, right? So do you want to work, for example, you want to work in banking, and then you're saying, oh, it must be investment banking, and you cannot get into investment banking. Can't you start with something else and see how that can lead you into investment banking? So do not be rigid about failures. Do not be rigid about repeated disappointment. Some of the visions, some of the ideas that you have, you can still keep them in view, while the approach, the method may need to be constantly and continually reviewed. So that is actually one of the reasons why people get stuck for so long, because they are married to a particular method, a particular idea, and they just stick to it. They stick to it even in the face of contradictory evidence, and they wonder, oh, but God told me this, but God spoke to me, but God said I will be this and I will be that. Yes, right? God can speak to you that you'll be this and you'll be that, but the journey may not be as straightforward as you are imagining it. So the responsibility now is to see how you can adapt to the realities around you, while you still keep the vision, while you still keep the dream, the goal in mind. As simple as that. So don't, as much as possible, be rigid about failure. Don't be too narrow minded. That's another way of thinking about it. Don't be one dimensional, that it is only this approach. No, the approach can mean different things, right, in different ways. So somebody said they wanted to start a church, and they were inspired by the Holy Ghost to give the name of a church, maybe one Hebrew name. And then the person in counseling said, this name will confuse people. People will not even understand what you're saying. Right? And of course, they didn't listen. And in no time, everything just went the way they didn't want. As simple as that. Not being rigid. Being able to adapt to the realities around us. So, and as a matter of fact, that is what wisdom is about. That you can actually see the reality around you and thrive and see how you can survive in spite of the difficulty around you. That's why Jesus said, for example, that you should be gentle as a dove, but also be wise as serpent. So we should not be rigid about failures, about repeated disappointment, that this is the only way, it's either this way or not this one, or it's either I married X, or no, what if X doesn't want to marry you, for example? You don't need to kill yourself because of that, right? So it is important that we are not rigid about failures or repeated disappointment. And that's the fifth point I want to share about the golden rules for turning failures around. Now, let me talk about one more before I talk about practical steps for turning these failures around. So I've said, don't blame people, don't blame God and all of those things. Don't internalize failure, don't visualize failure, don't dwell on past failures, and don't be rigid about it. And the last one is, don't be afraid of failure. As simple as that. Do not be afraid of failing in anything. Right? Why? Because I said the fear of failure is often the beginning of it. The fear of failure is often the beginning of it. The fear of disappointment. So people say, what if I fail? I usually say to people, for example, let's say you want to apply for a job. I say, what if they don't take me? I said, but apply first. Is that the worst thing that can happen to you? Just apply first. So don't be afraid to take steps. That's what we are saying. Don't be afraid to take steps. Don't be afraid to actually go again, even if you have been turned back before. Right? The worst thing that can happen to you is not to be rejected. The worst thing is to actually stay where you are, knowing that you could have been accepted. Because when you take a step, there's a 50% of succeeding, right? Whereas when you don't, the chances of failure they are 100%, right? So that's not, the worst thing that can happen is not for you to be turned back. It's not for you to receive no as an answer. It's not for you to receive rejection as an answer. No, the worst thing is actually to just die without making any attempt, and knowing fully well that you could have tried, knowing fully well that things probably would have gone differently if you had made effort, if you had made attempt. So don't be afraid of failing, right? Because there is a way that fear will condition you, will prevent you from maximizing your potential, prevent you from doing what you are expected to do. So in the Bible, Job says the things that he greatly feared had come upon him. Right? So where, and in another place where he talks about the fear of a person bringing them into a snare. That is, you become a servant. You get into bondage through the things that you fear. You are not daring. You are not bold. You don't want to talk to people, right? So I heard the story of somebody, or somebody shared the story recently how he married this wife. That when he got married, the wife was actually a top officer where she was working. She had a private driver, she had security guys and security guards around her, and he didn't even have a car. But somehow he summoned courage to approach the lady and say, you know what, I want to marry you. Just imagine that somebody maybe just walking around on the streets, just trying to start something, like talking to like a high class lady, and somehow everything clicked for them and things are different now. But he wasn't afraid, right? He wasn't fearful. He could have thought about his status and all of those things. So we should not be afraid of failing, right? We should be daring. That's what it means. You should be bold. You should be assertive. You should take steps. You should not be holding back just because you're like, oh, what if people don't accept me? What if things go wrong? What if I start that business and people don't patronize me? What if they patronize you? Huh? What if you talk to somebody and they say no? But what if they say right as well? And even if they say no, it's possible that you will have picked up one or two things that you probably didn't think about before. What we talk about not being rigid about, you can see maybe the approach. So if you don't test out a certain approach or a certain strategy, how will you know what you need to improve? How will you know what you need to make it better? So we should not, as much as possible, be afraid of taking steps. We should be daring, and when we do that, we'll be amazed at what the outcome will be. So these are what I have called the golden rules for turning failure around. That as much as possible, when we stick to these rules, we are already well positioned to take the practical steps that will help us, or that will enable us to turn failures around in whatever the area of life that we are talking about. Remember what I have said, that it covers every area of life. This is not excluding any area of life, because these principles are all the same. So you don't blame people, you don't internalize failure, you don't visualize failure, you don't dwell on it, you are not rigid about it. You are not saying, oh, this is the only way. So maybe somebody that you are trying to raise children, and it's got a particular method, a particular idea is not working. Don't say, oh, this is the way my mother brought me up, I must bring up my children in this particular way. No, it doesn't work. If it doesn't work like that, see what do you need to change, what do you need to adjust. As simple as that. So that is why it is important for us to learn these things that we are talking about with regards to failure and how to deal with it, right? Now, the next thing I want to talk about is now practical steps for turning failure around. Practical steps for turning failures around. Failures, repeated disappointment, whatever it is in any area of life, what are the practical steps that we need to turn these failures around, or this repeated disappointment? Now, the very first thing, based on what we have talked about don't do this, don't blame, a lot of those things, is simply a matter of attitude. Maintain a positive attitude, a positive outlook, a positive perspective to life. Now, again, if you go back to this Micah chapter number 7, that verse 8 that we have read, he said, rejoice not over me. He said, when I fall, I will rise again, right? That is, I am determined. Now, why am I putting this as the first? You'll be surprised. Why is this the first thing that we are talking about? A question of attitude. Because attitude matters. Attitude affects even things like faith. Attitude affects our approach, So in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 11, it says of Sarah that by faith, Sarah received strength to conceive because she judged God faithful. Right? That is, she had a positive attitude. She didn't see God as the problem. She didn't blame God. So she contextualized her situation. She wasn't looking for excuses that God, despite the fact that we have served you for so long, is this how you will repay us and all of those things? No, attitude matters because attitude affects approach. And that is actually why I'm starting with this question of attitude, having a positive attitude, a positive mindset, regardless of the area of life. And again, why is this important? Because if a person's attitude is not right, their approach, even if it is right, cannot generate the right results. I take that again. If a person's attitude is not right, even if their approach is right, even if they are putting in all their efforts, they are doing the best they know how to do, the result, the outcome will not be right. In other words, there is a way negative attitude affects a person's effort, a person's attempt to overcome their failures, to overcome their disappointment, right? So it is important that we maintain a positive attitude. Now, in other words, avoid all these negative attitudes that we have talked about. Avoid things like envy and jealousy. So I was talking along this line. I think the last time I talked about it a bit. Now, if you have tried to achieve something and it didn't work, don't because of that now think the problem, begin to blame people that have what you are desiring to have. So let's say, for example, a person, for whatever reason, maybe you're unemployed and all of those things, you are struggling in life, and then you see a nice car that just that is just driving on the street. Don't say, oh, see all of these rich people, we don't know what they are doing, it's because they are stealing, where their hands are not clean and all of those things. No, that's a negative attitude. You are open, you are believing God to get married, and your friend is married. Don't be envious of them. Don't be jealous. Don't say, what is a marriage? There are several people that are married and they are not even enjoying the marriage. No, that is conveying a negative energy, right? That is a negative attitude. Don't be jealous of people. Don't be envious of people, right? Don't criticize people that have what you are desiring to have. That way you are actually driving the thing away from you without realizing it. Don't be jealous of people. Don't be envious of people. Don't criticize people that have what you are aiming to have or what you are hoping to have. That way the thing will be far from you. In fact, no matter how hard you try, it will just look as if the more you try, the farther the thing gets from you. You will just not be able to explain it. This is why attitude is very, very important in everything that we do. That you are trying to achieve something and you can actually see people that have it. A wiser thing to do is to actually thank God for them. Thank God for them. Don't say, for example, you are a student, you are trying to pass a particular exam, and somebody has passed, they are just lucky. No, no, because the more you are trying to look for excuses, the more you are trying to look for reasons to justify your inner frustration, the longer the frustration will be there. So maintain a positive attitude. That's what we are trying to say by talking about all these golden rules that we previously talked about, that avoid anything negative, right? Celebrate with those that celebrate. It's in the Bible. Rejoice with those that rejoice, right? And mourn with those that mourn. So as much as possible, you are not trying to belittle the importance of what you set out to achieve yourself in the first instance, just because you try and it did not work out. So this is why people that criticize successful people, they don't know that they are sowing seeds for their failures. When you criticize what you previously desired, you are actually sowing seeds for you not to have that thing, no matter how hard you try. It is a fundamental principle in life. So as much as possible, you eject this negative energy out of your life, this attitude of jealousy, of rivalry, right? Of envy, of criticism, criticizing people unnecessarily just because they have something that you desire to have, but somehow you have not, because you have not been able to have it, you have not been able to achieve it, you just turn against it and you begin to talk against it. No, that is not how to live. That is not how to win in life. That is not how to overcome repeated failures, repeated stagnations, or repeated disappointment. If you want to turn failures around, if you want to be happy, if you want to be successful, you want to see your effort turn to produce the desired outcome as much as possible, you are not looking at others and trying to belittle what they have that you know you secretly desire. So that is very, very important. If somebody has achieved something at a very young age and you are struggling much later in life, just thank God for their life, or just keep quiet if you don't know what to say. If you are finding it difficult to rejoice with people, just learn to keep quiet instead of saying things that portray or that convey a negative energy. That is very, very important. So when you attribute the happenings in people's lives, they are just lucky, or it's just because their parents were rich, their parents helped them, and all of those things. No, just focus on your lane and do not let negative energy get into you. Things like unforgiveness, right? Because people wronged you in the past, so you find it difficult to let go. So that negative energy is affecting your ability to concentrate, to reach out for new possibilities. So just eject any form of negativity, anything that is not right, anything that does not align to walking in love, that does not align to wishing people well, that does not align with what we call the golden rule of living. What you wish for others, you should do. What you wish that others do to you, do for them. Wish them that thing. Don't think evil about people. Don't think, oh, this person bought that car. Well, where maybe they will just have accident and then they will just die. No. Or maybe somebody very close to you, they are successful, they are doing, and you're like, maybe things will just go wrong for them, and then so that you can marry. No. You can imagine somebody that went to a pastor and said, I want to marry this person. And the pastor said, but this person is married. And he said, what if the wife dies? Just imagine that. So they went to their pastor to say, oh, they would like to marry, let's say, brother A. And pastor said, but brother A is married. And he said, oh, but what if brother A's wife died? Just imagine how people are thinking. So that's part of what we are saying. People don't need to go down for you to rise. So get rid of any negative attitude as much as possible. Let your mind, let your heart be free, because it is actually when that mind, that heart is free, that you can be in a position to have clean ideas, to receive God's direction, God's insight for what you are expected to do, where you are expected to go, where you are expected to turn, the specific directions that you need to follow for you to see the desired results. So I say maintain a positive, no matter the situation, no matter the negativity, no matter how much it has happened or how often you have seen it, as much as possible, do not let failures, do not let repeated disappointment affect you to the point that you begin to have this negative attitude against people, against God, against everything. So it is very, very important. That's why, for example, some of the things relating to issues of terrorism and vandalism and all sorts of things that young people, for example, you probably have heard before, that maybe when teachers in schools say some negative things to some young people, that condition them, and then they grow resentful towards the system, towards the society, and they want to do something against the system, against the society. So that is how attitude can actually motivate a person. That's why negative energy can grow so much into a person and can result in disastrous consequences, right? So envy, it can be deadly. All this negative attitude will not produce positive results. So that is the first thing, having and maintaining a positive attitude no matter what, ejecting all these negative energies from one's life. Now let's talk about one more before we wrap up for this month. In fact, we'll start talking about it because we cannot finish it. So I said the practical steps. The first one is to maintain a positive attitude, a positive outlook. And number two is to understand the nature and the root causes of your failures. Understand the nature and the root causes of that particular failure. Now, of course, delays, repeated disappointment can be caused by different things, can be caused by different attitude. And this is where I'll take some time to explain what we're talking about. Now, so for example, delays in a person's life or repeated failures can be attributed or can be traceable in some instances to a person's immaturity relative to what they are believing for, relative to what they want to achieve in life, or even relative to God's purpose, God's design for their lives. So, for example, in the case of Moses, Moses was called to be a deliverer of God's people. Now, when he wanted to do that in his own way, he ended up killing somebody. And what did he do? He ran away for 40 years. So for 40 years, he was stagnated. For 40 years, he could not actually do what he wanted to do, right? Until he was equipped, he encountered God, and all of those things. So delay in a person's life can be, or repeated failures can be, that people are not mature for what they are supposed to achieve or what they want to achieve. So in the Bible, in Deuteronomy chapter number 8, verse 3, Deuteronomy chapter number 8, verse number 3, talk about God's encounter, or God's lesson, or God's experience with the children of Israel. And he said, he humbled you, allowed you to hunger, and fed you with manna in the wilderness. Right? That is, God allowed them to pass through these things for 40 years. He humbled you, allowed you to hunger, then fed you with manna in the wilderness, that you may know. That is, that you may come to the realization of what you are expected to know before you get to where you're going in life. Right? That you may get to the point where you actually see that, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. That you can get to the point where you have actually acquired the necessary skills, the necessary qualifications, or the necessary experience for what you are believing God for. Right? So I like to give the example. Imagine maybe you are not good enough and you are praying for a miracle to pass. Maybe any exam. It's not that God cannot do it. It's the fact that if he does it, it can be detrimental to your future, and you bring shame to the name of God. You can even end up doing things that will cause injury to yourself, cause injury to others. So because God does not want that to happen, it looks as if such prayers are not answered. Right? So that's why I said it is important to understand the root causes, to understand the nature. Why am I failing? Why have I not achieved this particular desire? So that is a place of sitting down to actually analyze the situation. So I say, in some instances, failures or repeated disappointment can be due to a person's immaturity relative to what they want to achieve, or relative to what they are believing God for. Right? It can also be related to willful disobedience. That is, you know God's will, you know what you are expected to do. As we say, something within you is telling you that's not what you are expected, what you should be doing, but somehow you are going against it. Right? So delays, failures, repeated disappointment can be as a result of this willful disobedience, or just disconnection from God's will. From disconnection from God's will. So as much as possible, you may be praying, you may be doing everything right, but if you are in a direction that you are not supposed to be, you may try so hard and the result may not be right. Right? So there are delays, there are disappointments, there are failures that are just because people are disconnected from God's perfect will for their lives. And until you know this, until you actually get to the root of that particular one, you may do every other thing right and it may not work. Now, our time is fast spent this month, so we'll have to continue this next month. But quickly, what have we talked about? We continue our discussion on the golden rules for turning failures around. We have talked about not internalizing failure, not dwelling on failure, not visualizing or expecting failure, not being rigid about failure, and not being afraid of failure. And I started talking about practical steps that we need to take to turn failure around. I said the very first one is to have this positive attitude, to maintain a positive outlook, not to eject, or not to transfer negative energy around just because we have failed. And the second one, which I started talking about, is to understand the root causes of failure. So we'll continue from there in our next meeting. Our next meeting, by God's grace, will be on August the 19th. So I'll talk about overcoming failures and repeated stagnation, part 3. So hopefully by then I'll be able to talk about, I have about 4 or 5 reasons, practical steps rather, on how to turn these failures and repeated stagnations around. So I'll be able to conclude that, and then we'll go into next thing the next time we meet. So please, as much as possible, ensure you look out for that. They save the date, August the 19th, on your calendar, and then be part of it. And if this has blessed you, please like it, share it with friends, share with people around you, and see how they can be blessed with it as well. And if you have questions, if you have any inquiries, including getting things right, getting your walk with God right, or you just have some other questions, please send me an email. The email address will be in the description box, and I'll be happy to answer whatever questions or queries you may have. But go over this that we've talked about, see how this applies to any area of life, like we said, and what steps, what adjustments you need to make, and ensure that you turn whatever failures, whatever disappointments that you can see around, and actually go ahead to achieve the results that you desire. Thank you so much for tuning in and for joining this month or whenever you listen to this. God bless you and see you next time. Bye bye.